Good morning, wonderful Waypoint, if I may borrow a line from Leanne. It is absolutely lovely to see you guys this morning, and welcome to online. For those of you who couldn't be here this morning, we sincerely miss you and would really like to have a coffee with you. So next week, if you can make it, please join us next week. For any of you who are here for the first time, you are so welcome. And Jean, did you see any newcomers this morning? Did you meet anyone?
Yeah, I saw a few, but I didn't speak to anyone, unfortunately.
Did you not speak to them? So unfortunately, if we missed you, if you are new and we missed you, we would love to connect with you. If you have any questions, just to find out more about our mission, our vision, what we are all about as a community, our life groups, our children's areas, if you have any questions, you are welcome to join us afterwards, just outside the door. There will be an information corner, and you can just ask any staff or volunteer member that will be there. We would love to share with you what we are all about. For those of you who have been coming for a while, you must have heard that we keep on saying that our mission is to inspire people to follow Jesus, because following Jesus makes you better at life and makes your life better. It's not just a rhyme that we say every morning. We really, truly believe it because we have experienced how our lives are better when we follow Jesus. So we have a few things coming up in this month, starting this weekend. So excited about the camp. Who's excited about the camp? Let me just hear some. Now you really need to work on your excitement. That's not really exciting. Let's try again. Who's excited about the camp? That's a bit better. So we have a community camp this weekend. We are so looking forward to it. It's our first camp since beginning of COVID, and all the spots are booked out. So we're fully booked. But for those of you who want to have some camp experience and not actually camping with us, we do have day visitors, 100 Rand an adult, 50 Rand a child. So you can still come and have a little bit of a camping experience to join us on Saturday. There will also be a hike. For those who want to join in with a hike, that's for free. You can just meet at Pine Lodge, I think about 9 o'clock, 9:15. All the information is on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and of course our app. If you don't have our Waypoint app, that's a wonderful tool to get all the information. You can download it, it's free. You can also ask that at the information center just after the service, anything that you need to know. Another nice event coming up. It's next Friday, not this Friday, the Friday after, 7th of October, we have a LAN party. And that will be for anyone from grade 5 upwards, anyone young at heart. If you are a senior young adult or a young senior adult, you are most welcome. Anyone is welcome to join. Just bring your own PC console, but all the information is on all the quips. And then, a lot of information, a lot of dates to diarize. I hope you take a note, a mental note. Trivia night. Whereas Roasters is having a trivia night on the 28th of October. Do you see it? Anyone who's been to the trivia nights before know that it's loads of fun, wonderful prizes, wonderful excitement. Even if you think you have no clue, you have no general knowledge, there will be one question that you can answer. I mean, I'm one of those who don't have a big general knowledge, but there's at least one question that I can answer and I can contribute to my team. So please, write in your teams or what, skryf julle spanne in. And okay, for the next hour, we will be together, and John will lead us in 3 songs. Then Dirk will take us through week 5 of You Are Not the Boss of Me. It's been an excellent series. I can't wait to hear what today is all about. Next week, we will conclude the series in week 6 of You Are Not the Boss of Me. So don't miss next week. That will be the end. And so, over to you, John.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Guys, you can stand, and while you're standing, just look at the person next to you and tell them, yes, you look beautiful today. Guys, if it's just a tip, say it to your significant other, please, guys. Don't make fights here. Come on, okay? I stand before the greatness of your renown. And I have heard of the majesty and wonder of you, King of heaven. In humility I bow, and as your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me, and you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you've made a way for all to enter in. I have heard you call my name. I have heard the song of love that you sing. So I will let you draw me out beyond the shore into your grace. Your grace as your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me, and you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter in. 'Cause you make me brave, you make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore into the waves. You make me brave, you make me brave. No fear can hinder now the promises you've made. You make me brave, you make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore into the waves. You make me brave, you make me brave. No fear can hinder now the love that made a way. 'Cause you make me brave, you make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore into the waves. You make me brave, you make me brave. No fear can hinder now the promises you made. And as your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me, and you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you've made a way for all to enter. As your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me, and you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter. Champion of heaven, you made a way. Champion of heaven, you've made a way for all to enter in. When darkness tries to roll over my bones, when sorrow comes to steal the joy I own, When brokenness and pain is all I know, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. 'Cause my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not a captive to the lies, and I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. No, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Standing in your love. There is power that can break off every chain. There's power that could empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. And my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. When I'm standing on your love, standing in your love. There's a way back home for the wandering soul. There's a peaceful calm for the restless one. And if you're so far gone you can't see the shore, well, just lift your eyes and look to the Lord. 'Cause he's walking on the water, he will calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther, he's the hope that you need. And if your sails are torn and tattered and the storm just won't cease, so take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. And I was breaking down at the end of my rope when the sweetest sound silenced the noise. He's the Prince of Peace, The waves know his voice, so just lift your eyes and look to the Lord, 'cause he's walking on the water. He will calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther. He's the hope that you need. And if your sails are torn and tattered and the storm just won't cease, take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. And I was far from the peaceful shore, falling through the hopeless floor. Oh, the wreckage of the fallout, there was no way out. Then I saw the lighthouse. I was sinking when I felt your hand. You put my feet back on dry land. When I was far down, love made a way out. Oh, thank you, God, for the lighthouse. Whoa. I can see the walking on the water. He will calm your raging seas. No, you don't have to look no farther. He's the hope that you need. And if your sails are torn and tattered and the storm just won't cease, but take hold of the hand of the Savior, 'cause he's the anchor of peace. He's the anchor of peace. Oh, he's the anchor of peace. There's a way back home for the wandering soul. There's a peaceful calm for the restless one. And if you're so far gone, you can see the shore. Well, just lift your eyes and look to the Lord. Yo, Father, just thank you for hope in this world. Thank you for allowing us not to just cope, but to overcome and to live to the full. We thank you for this day. We thank you for giving us time today. And Lord, help us to open our hearts for what you want for us. Help us to open our hearts for what you are planning for us. And where we're lacking faith, God, just help us to give you a chance and to trust you. We believe that you are inherently good, that you are wanting the best for us as children. And we thank you for your heart, God. Amen.
Good morning and welcome to week 5 of You're Not the Boss of Me. Yes, it's a how-to series like a DIY. Instead of fixing kitchen cabinets, we're getting a hang of our emotions to make sure that emotions that are awesome passengers don't become drivers in our lives, because they come out in our mood, they come out in our mouth, and it has a negative impact on our relationships on a daily basis. Let's just quickly cover what we've done. Tian took us through guilt. He took us through envy. I had the privilege of talking about anger. Tian kind of said, who on our team struggles with anger and struggles with today's message? Oh, Dirk, can you do? No. Tian's on holiday, which he deserves. He's been working hard without a break, so he's on leave. So I'm the captain of the B team. It's my privilege to be with you this morning. But we've had a lot of fun last week with anger, and it challenged me in preparing for that message, and it challenged me this week as well. And it's just great to be talking about these practical things, because it's often something we assume and we just go through and we do, but we need a time to just take a step back and say, is this the best possible way? Or isn't there something different? So what we're talking about this morning then is fear. Now, fear is something that we all experience on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. For some of us, the people around us would say, you could do with a little bit more fear. That would just stop you from making these rash decisions and jumping into things and doing things that you'll regret later. But for most of us, what fear does, it robs us of opportunities because we don't want to take that step. It interferes with our relationships, and it keeps us awake at night. So this morning, what we're talking about is how do we wrestle with fear so that fear does not become the boss of us? Now, the interesting thing is that fear is a byproduct of everyday human development. Why I say that is because of this. Fear is the byproduct of our ability to accumulate knowledge and project into the future. So as human beings, we are designed, and God gave us the gift to gather information. But then it goes a step further, because otherwise we would just be computers. Some of us a PC and others a Mac. There's a difference, but just a big difference. And just accumulating knowledge. But it goes a step further. What it allows us to do, now Church Online, you guys are welcome to comment, because this is an interactive conversation that we're having. But what it also then allows us to do is take this information and make a prediction of the future. That's where fear comes from. That's why, I don't know if you've experienced it, just look at your own life. I developed fear for a lot of things. And not a negative fear, just like you kind of know what the problem could be. So it changes how you would drive and at what speed you would drive. But when you're young and you just got your license, man, you're unstoppable. So this is a message for the young people that are getting their licenses, coming from me and not from your dad. It's like, watch how you drive, because you think you're invincible. Unless you've experienced a few things to understand you're not as invincible as you think you are. You're not as quick as you think you are. And this isn't Forza Horizon. This is real life. There's no reset button and there you go and try again. But that's how we develop. But here's the other thing, is this is normal, like I've showed you. It's part of who we are. But let's say we could take that away. We wouldn't want to. Because there's the other side to that coin of making a projection of the future. Because it's not always bad. It's often good as well. It's that thing that gets us to that point where we say, what if? And see potential, and imagine things, and create things. It's also that thing that is like, man, I can't wait. Now, if you're at school, it's like, I can't wait for the holidays, because it's going to be so awesome. Because you can already see what you're going to do this holiday, based on what you've experienced other holidays, right? It's that thing that this game is coming out. Man, I can't wait for this game, just to be disappointed 9 out of 10 times, I know. But it's that feeling of what if. So this is fear. It gives us the ability to imagine, it gives us the ability to have hope, and it gives us the ability to dream. Like somebody said the other day, there's nothing like mere hope. even a little bit of hope is what we need to move forward. So that's a quick overview of where we are in terms of fear, and we've looked at the downside of fear, where fear starts to become the driver, where fear starts to take control of things. It puts you off balance, it makes you distracted. And a lot of people have got a negative relationship with fear because as a parent, it makes you an overprotective parent. Because you're thinking of 1,000 things that could possibly go wrong. So that's also part of what we're talking about. And it creates this space where you're focused on you and you become self-absorbed. So we want to move past that. Jesus spoke a lot about fear. The challenge with what Jesus says about fear, when we read that in isolation, it comes across as being very naive. It's easy to understand, but so difficult to apply. The bottom line of what Jesus says about fear is, don't be afraid. That's what Jesus says. It's easy to understand, but it's so difficult to apply. The challenge also, why it comes across as being naive, is the way we read and interact with the Bible. We kind of take snapshots. And then that stands in isolation, and it's difficult for us to connect it to something. And then to really understand what Jesus is saying about that. So it's not one person's fault, it's just because of the way things are. And that's why it's helpful to read through the whole gospel. The gospel being in the New Testament, the first 4, and reading that as a book on its own right and on its own merits to be viewed, and understanding that thread that runs through it. Because of that, we're going to be looking at what Jesus says about fear, and for the next 2 hours, I'm going to take you on a journey on how Jesus addresses this fear, right? So send a WhatsApp quickly, tell people to turn the stove off, because we're going to be late for Sunday lunch. No, we won't. But what I'm going to share with you is going to be very exciting, because it just opened up my mind to see how these things connect. Backstory. Jesus always had people around him. The crowd was always following Jesus. But then he had a smaller group. It's a group that he picked, and he said, you come and journey with me. Those were the disciples. We call them the disciples because they followed Jesus, did everything with Jesus, and Jesus showed them what to do. Those were the same people, the 12 that he picked, of which one was Judas, and it falls out of the scope of what we're talking about this morning, and he was replaced. And those 12 then became the ones that built the church and grew the faith movement, which we're going to get to. And then they changed from being called disciples to being called apostles. So it's the same people. So Jesus had the disciples. Jesus says, team meeting, guys, team meeting. They all come in, they're like, they're ready. What's up? Jesus says, I've picked you. And they're like, man, we made it. We've arrived. Jesus says, I'm going to send you out as sheep amongst wolves. For us, we can understand. For them, they felt because they experienced. They grew up in a world where they saw a sheep that went out amongst the wolves. And all that was left was hooves and a big mess when that happens. For them, it was real. And Jesus says, I'm going to send you into the world as sheep amongst wolves. And they're like, they knew in that moment what Jesus was saying. They didn't fully understand, but they could get a good idea. And Jesus' response to them feeling that was, but don't fear. It doesn't make sense. So Jesus says, I know you guys aren't getting this. So let's go on a field trip. So Jesus then, and we read this from Matthew, he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. So Jesus said, guys, come, field trip. I need to explain this to you. You need to get another perspective on what it is that I'm trying to get across to you. Suddenly, a furious storm came up. It was normal for them, being fishermen, growing up in that area, that this storm would come up. The difference is, this one is furious. There's a lot of wind. You shouldn't think of this as Sunday school with the pictures up on the wall of Jesus and the storm. It's not that kind of storm. This is a you are going to die storm. This is wind and rain coming in at an angle, hair in your face kind of, I can't see anything kind of storm. A furious storm. So I don't know what that would be like, but I can just imagine. So let's just go back 1 second. So that the waves swept over the boat, and herein lies the challenge. I was always puzzled by this. How can they be afraid? They're in a boat. The boat's supposed to float, right? So what's the problem? Until we went to Sedgefield on a holiday, and one day the guy said, working at the resort, the boats aren't going out today. And I wasn't planning on going on the boats, but I like asking questions. So like, why aren't the boats going out today? Now understand that the lake there by Sedgefield is small compared to the Sea of Galilee. And the storms there are nothing compared to the Sea of Galilee. It was just a strong wind blowing, and it created this size waves. I said, what's the problem with the boats not being able to go out with this wind? He said, the waves hit against the boat and they splash into the boat. Because those boats aren't super tankers. They're just recreational boats. When they fill up with water, they become heavier and ride lower in the water, allowing more water to come in. You can see the problem. It's that old thing of a boat doesn't sink because of the water that's on the outside, it sinks because of the water that's on the inside. The waves were crashing over the boat. The boat was filling up with water. They were going to die. It was that kind of a situation. So we read this. But Jesus was sleeping. In my opinion, and this is simply my opinion, Jesus was fake sleeping. Because in that boat with no cover, with that cold and the water in and crashing and rocking, there's no way Jesus could sleep, but he wanted to make a point. But let's take it on face value and take it for the fact that Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him saying, not saying, but shouting, because they can see that we are going to die. And it's not going to happen someday, it's going to happen today. And they were shouting, Lord, save us. I'm not going to shout the whole thing, but when I read this, imagine the shouting, because you had to be heard over the waves, over the wind, plus you know you're going to die. We're going to drown. Jesus replied. He doesn't even get up. He like props himself up on one elbow, and he's like, you of little faith. And they're like, what? You of little faith, why are you so afraid? And they're like, the storm, we're going to die. Then he got up. See, I told you, he didn't even get up. He was just like, then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves and was completely calm. Now, it was normal for these storms to sweep in through the valley, rage across the Sea of Galilee, and then move on. But it wasn't normal for this storm to pass that quickly at the moment that Jesus spoke. So I know if you're not a Christian, it might be difficult for you to believe that that is what happened. But here's the thing. The point of the story isn't that Jesus has got control over nature, that Jesus can control a storm. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story was that Jesus was illustrating what he said to them just before about not fearing. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? They asked the right question. Not how could he do this, but who is this man? Because obviously he's not what we thought he'd be. And in that moment, they couldn't create enough distance between them and Jesus. Because remember, they're in a boat. You can only go that far from Jesus. But in that instant, they saw something different of this Jesus, and it blew their minds. To the extent that they said, even the winds and the waves obey him. And then we continue. And what we then find is, I'm going to take you to Mark. So we have Matthew, which is the first gospel, first book in the New Testament. Then we read from Mark, and Mark wrote what Peter, who traveled with Jesus, told him to write. And if we directly translate what Peter told Mark to write, he said, they feared a great fear. They feared a great fear. It was saying that the fear that they had of the storm was replaced by another fear that was greater. That fear was a realization of who Jesus was. And for a moment, and in an instant, they weren't afraid. For a moment, they had peace because they saw something of who Jesus was. For a moment, their fear of Jesus overwhelmed their fear that they had and experienced up until that point. But the disciples, being the disciples, and it's kind of encouraging, still didn't get it. They still didn't get this point of, don't be afraid. So Jesus then had a whole crowd gather, and they're there by the sea. And he kind of went over his time, and I think that's where we get it from on Sundays. So the crowd was there till late, and they realized, we need to feed people. And Jesus said, well, you feed them. And they're like, Jesus, there isn't enough food in this whole region to feed these people. Just the men there were 5,000. We didn't prepare for this. Now, we, as staff that planned for forgiveness conference and this event and that event, and the circuit meeting that was here 2 weeks ago, just catering for 25 people is a mission. We started planning 3 weeks before for 25 people because we had a tight budget. And now, with no warning, feed just men 5,000. So they were ill-prepared for this. And Jesus is like, sermon illustration. And you know the story. Boy had a lunchbox. Jesus feeds the people with what was packed in a lunchbox. He thanks God, the Father, for the bread and the fish. He breaks it. He gives it to the disciples. The disciples start handing it out, and they feed everybody. 5,000 men, and the women and the children. They fed everybody. So the disciples were like, we really don't know what happened. I guess we kind of did a miracle. So Jesus knew that, and like, guys, you need to leave now before your heads get too big and before you think it's because of you. I need to take you from here. So we then continue with Matthew. And Jesus says to them this. He says, don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Jesus was saying, don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Jesus knew and recognized that there's more to you than what we can see and what we can measure. There's a part of you that continues to exist after what we see now stops existing. And Jesus is saying, don't fear what can kill what we can see here. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And that one isn't the devil. That one is God. Jesus is saying, rather than fear what can kill you, if you have to fear anything, fear God. And he knew that they still didn't get it. And after feeding the people, Jesus says to them, get in the boat. But they wouldn't want to get in the boat. So let's just go back to Matthew. Just before this one, Jesus says to them to get in the boat. Jesus made them go in the boat. Why did Jesus have to make them go in the boat? If you read that Greek word for made them, That word is coerced. It's forced. Why didn't they want to get in the boat? Because they knew what happened last time when they got in the boat. And they're like, we ain't getting in no boat with you again. And Jesus is like, you're going to go on your own this time. Jesus says to them, you get in the boat. You start rowing to the other side. I will find you when you're there. So they start rowing. But a headwind comes up, which pushes them back. And they're rowing against us. So they're rowing forward, but this wind is pushing them back. And they're young, and they're strong, and they're rowing, but the wind is pushing them back. So what should have taken a few hours, what we then read is, just after this, shortly before dawn. Remember where our story stopped with the feeding the people and Jesus saying, get in the boat? No, get in the boat. It was sunset. Shortly before dawn. And anybody that's been on a boat, and especially if you're rowing, if you stop rowing, you end up back where you were. So it's now before dawn, and these guys are still rowing. They're not getting anywhere. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And at that point, if you're not a Jesus follower, you would say, hang on a second. When you told me Jesus calmed the storm, it's like, it was difficult to believe, but I kind of can see how that could happen. But you want me to expect to believe that Jesus walked on the water? Here's something that will help you. We don't believe that Jesus walked on the water because it's written in the Bible. It's better than that, and it goes beyond that. We believe it because Matthew, who was a tax collector and traveled with Jesus, wrote that Jesus walked on the water. And Mark, who wrote down what Peter told him to write, that traveled with Jesus as his disciple, said that Jesus walked on the water. And John, that was with Jesus from his baptism in the Jordan right through to the end and growing the church after his death, that John said that Jesus walked on the water. And because they said that Jesus did, we believe that Jesus walked on the water. So Jesus walks on the water, but here's the other thing, why we believe it's true. There's a literary device called embarrassment. When you view any historical writing of any important person, and there's an embarrassing side note, kind of in the margin, written in there, that would detract how we see that person. And that's in the text. That makes the text more credible. Because if somebody came afterwards, after they discovered how famous Jesus was, or how famous Peter, Mark, and John were, that they would say, no. Jesus didn't feed 50 people. He fed 5,000, just the men. They would change the story to give more credibility to this important person. But when we find something that says, this is what they did, and that's how they reacted, and it's kind of embarrassing, they wouldn't write that in there if it didn't really happen. Because who would make something up that's embarrassing, right? So that shows us that it's a credible source that we have in front of us, because we read this. When they saw Jesus walking on the lake, they were terrified. And what's our message that Jesus is talking to these guys about is, do not fear. And what are they? Terrified, beyond fear. It's not like, hey, what's happening here? I'm not so sure now. It's like, no, I'm terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. This, and why I'm saying it's embarrassing, those of you that have seen a Leon Schuster movie, and the one where he pretends to be this Chinese guy that's got a pet shop, and he gets the people in to set the pet shop up, and then they make them believe that the snakes are now out, and he's made this hype about how poisonous the snake is, and the lights go out, and it's chaos. The way that those guys were shrieking and shouting for their mummies, right? That's exactly what these guys were doing in the boat. We just have it like in a more appeasable way of engaging with the text. They cried out in fear. They were crying for their mummies at that point. these guys, they were supposed to know we're not supposed to fear. But again, it's kind of encouraging because we always go back to that space of fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. Again, Jesus with the, don't fear. Don't let fear be the boss of you. It's like, Jesus. No, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. This is Jesus again saying to them, don't fear. Jesus is saying to them, as long as I'm here with you, you don't need to fear anything. Why do you fear? Whatever it is that you're fearing now, when I'm there, you don't need to fear it. Even if there is something to fear, right? Again, it didn't stick. Again, they feared. They were terrified. So we fast forward a bit. We're with Jesus and his disciples right at the end of his ministry. He's got them together for Passover. And he says to them, what I've been called to do is to bring in a new covenant. What I've been tasked to do is to start a new movement. What I've been tasked with doing is to give and to bring a new command. And they were, finally, this is it. This is why I left the family business of fishing and followed Jesus. Finally, he's going to reveal that he's the Messiah. It's going to become public. He's going to change everything that we're experiencing in terms of Roman oppression and Rome manipulating everything. Finally, that moment has arrived. And then what happens? Jesus gets captured. Jesus gets beaten, and Jesus is crucified. And that whole new covenant, new command, new movement suddenly is off the table. That moment of hope, of flicker, of this is it, it's devastation. Doesn't exist. But then they go to the tomb. And when they go to the grave, they find an empty grave. And they meet their friend Jesus. And as quickly as it was taken away, as quickly a new covenant, a new movement, and a new command was back on the table. Because for us, Easter is something that happens in April every year. For them, Jesus' resurrection suddenly validated everything that Jesus said to them up to that point. 3 years of spending time with Jesus. We read it in 3 hours. They spent 3 years with Jesus. And Jesus' resurrection suddenly validated and confirmed everything that he said. They could believe it. Then, suddenly, do not fear made sense. The full extent of Jesus's do not fear because I am here made perfect sense. Had a new meaning. Up until that point, I would go as far as to say it was just words. But then, in that moment and in that instant, it became real. For them, it wasn't just about Easter once a year. It became their source of strength. It became their source of courage and boldness. That's the thing that allowed these disciples that now became the apostles to stand in front of the very people that captured Jesus, beat Jesus, and crucified Jesus. In other words, they could do exactly the same to them. The same people that when Jesus was captured, hid, lied, and denied that same people to now stand before the people that did that to Jesus and say, you killed the Messiah. He was the Messiah and he is the Messiah and you crucified him. That is what gave them the boldness to stand in front of them and give them that message that clearly. That was the source of their strength. Let me put it in a way that's going to help you understand this. It proved to them that Jesus could be trusted. Even if the world is a scary place, that's not going to change. But now suddenly, because I view Jesus differently, it changes how I react to that. And they no longer needed to be afraid. Up until that point, and we're going to fast forward, not just in the gospel, but in time, to the end of the 2nd century when Marcus Aurelius was governor. And during that time, Christians were persecuted for their faith. They were thrown into the circus, which is a weird name because we think of Boswell Wilkie Circus, but it's not that. They were thrown in the Colosseum and died horrible deaths, facing gladiators, trained soldiers. Imagine that. You as a farmer now have to face a trained soldier. It's like, what chance have you got? 0. Animals, for the creating a spectacle for the people looking at it, mauled and killed by animals. And up until that point, medical history and research couldn't really progress because it was against the law and against customs to open up a dead body, to investigate and do research on a body. And you needed to know how the body works so that you can fix what's wrong with the body when somebody's still living to give them a chance. So that's part of what hampered the growth of medical research. So and it's kind of gruesome, and that's why the kids are on that side. But I'm going to not make it that gruesome. But up until that point, the only option that they had was for these medical practitioners to sit on the sidelines. As soon as these animals went in and killed the people, and they got the animals out, they would rush in and be with that person in their last dying moments to investigate firsthand how the body works before that person dies. Because when that person dies, they need to be buried or cremated. But you can't do your investigation. But that, because of that dynamic, it forced them to be present with people as they died. That one moment that I think, despite all the other fears that we share, is kind of that big thing of what's next after this and what's ahead for me. And to be with people in their last moments here on earth. And we get this account from Claudius Gallienus, and he writes this. This is firsthand what he experienced with 2nd century Christians. For fearlessness of death and the hereafter is something we witness in them every day. It's not a now and then. It's not a something that pops up. In each and every one of them, there's a fearlessness of death. The reason why they went in there for their faith is the thing that gave them the source of boldness and courage. And they displayed it right up until the end. Because it's not something that they manufactured. It's something that they discovered. And I want to close with this and fast forward. We're so fast forward, we're now in the future. No, not yet. Fast forward in terms of where we read about Peter and the disciples in Matthew to what Peter writes in the book of Peter. Here's Peter who's seen his fellow apostles tortured, murdered, killed for their faith. He's experienced that firsthand. He's experienced persecution. And Peter, under the prompting of the Holy Spirit, writes this, not knowing that we would sit here more than 2,000 years later and read this, written by him. Peter writes, cast all your cares on Him, because He cares for you. Peter, that has experienced firsthand how people were persecuted and murdered for their faith, writes to us and says, cast all your cares on Him, because He cares for you. And for us in these moments where we're faced with fear, it's the one question we've always asked is, does God know that I'm going through this? And the second question, does He care that I'm going through this? And Peter comes to encourage us and say, God knows you're going through this. And God cares that you're going through this. That's what it means to step into a relationship with Jesus. Because then Jesus becomes the person that says to you, don't fear, because I am with you. And we understand that He is for us. And it changes everything. It moves it from here to here. And in a world where we don't see light, where we don't see hope, where we can walk in and be the light and be the hope, because Jesus is the light and Jesus is the hope. And where we walk, Jesus walks with us. He doesn't check in with us every now and then. He walks with us. Peter says, cast your cares on Him, because He cares for you. That's why with Peter and with the psalmist, we can get to the point where we say, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear. I'm going to invite the band up to come and close for us and just kind of create a moment where we can process what it is that's causing anxiety in our life and keeping us awake at night, and say, God, thank you that I know you know about this, and thank you that I know you care about this. And just create that space for us to give that to God. Let's close our eyes. Father, thank you for the encouragement that you've given us in journeying with your disciples. Father, not snapshots of, but just involved in every part of their life. And Father, as you've journeyed with them, so you journey with us. And thank you that we can know that you care about us and you know what it is that we're going through. And that you're available to us. And we thank you for that. Amen.
Speak to me when the silence steals your voice. You understand me. Come to me in the valley of unknowns. You understand me. You understand me. Oh, you understand me, God. You understand me. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. And I believe understand me. You understand me. Help me reach the faith that's underneath. You understand me. You understand me. Oh, you understand me, God. You understand me. So I threw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. 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 Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. Leave the rest in the Father's hands. I will rest in the Father's hands. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. So I throw all my cares before you. My doubts and fears don't scare you. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought. So I stop all negotiations with the God of all creation. You're bigger than I thought you were. You're bigger than I thought you were. Awesome, guys. I hope you guys have an awesome week. We are done with today's service. If you're watching online, if you're still watching, you haven't just logged off rudely, thank you for joining us. They will be giving at the door, not your door, this door in the venue. And guys, the coffee shop is unfortunately closed. Psych, it's open. You can get some coffee after the service. And have an awesome week, guys. Cool. Peace.